You are Private Korvax of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops, and your lasgun feels heavier than usual in your trembling hands. The weight isn't physical. You've carried this weapon for 3 years through 17 different hells, but something deeper, more fundamental has shifted. The familiar grip, scarred from countless firefights, now feels foreign against your palm. Your fingers, once steady enough to thread a Laz pack in complete darkness, shake as if palsied. Before you lies a trench that was, until 6 hours ago, occupied by your own wounded comrades, men you've shared rations with during the endless nights of watch duty, guardsmen who taught you how to clean your weapon with spit and prayer when the cleaning kits ran out. The same soldiers who pulled you from the rubble when the orc artillery found your foxhole on Mortian Tertius. Their blood has turned the mud the color of rust, and their screams have been replaced by a silence that feels heavier than any artillery barrage. The smell hits you first, always the smell. Copper and cordite, human waste and something sweeter, more cloying. It's the scent of exposed intestines mixing with the chemical tang of Laz burn wounds. Your nostrils flare involuntarily, and you taste bile at the back of your throat. This is the smell that follows every charge, every glorious victory. It's the smell that clings to your uniform, no matter how many times you try to wash it out in whatever stagnant water you can find. Behind you, Commissar Vex's voice cuts through the thunder of distant artillery like a blessed blade through flesh. Fix bayonets. We go over the top in 30 seconds. Anyone who hesitates will be shot for cowardice. You've heard these exact words 47 times before. You've counted. Each time you've obeyed without question, your body moving with the mechanical precision of your training. You've charged into certain death because death was preferable to the alternative, the cold kiss of a bolt round to the back of your skull, fired by the man who was supposed to protect your soul. But this time something inside you breaks. It starts as a whisper in the deepest part of your mind, a voice that sounds suspiciously like your younger brother's, the brother you left behind on Cadia before the planet cracked. Why? The voice asks, not the practical why of tactics or strategy, but the fundamental why that cuts to the bone of human existence. Why must you die today? Why must your friends' bodies serve as stepping stones for another meaningless advance? Why does survival require the constant sacrifice of everything that makes survival worthwhile? Your heart hammers against your ribs like a caged animal, each beat so violent you're certain the guardsman beside you can hear it. Sweat beads on your forehead despite the bitter cold, and your mouth tastes of copper pennies and fear. The metallic tang grows stronger as you bite down unconsciously on your tongue, the small pain a desperate anchor to reality in a moment that feels increasingly surreal. You remember Trooper Kellam, who used to sleep in the bunk next to yours. Kellam, who collected pressed flowers from every world you fought on, keeping them in a battered tin box that served as his pillow. He'd shown you a yellow bloom from Armageddon, petals somehow still vibrant despite the ash that coated everything else on that world. "My daughter will want to see these," he'd said, eyes bright with a hope that seemed impossible in the grimdark reality of your existence. "When I get home, she'll want to see that there's still beauty in the galaxy." Kellam is lying 15 meters ahead of you now, his chest cavity opened like a grotesque flower. The tin box lies beside him, its contents scattered and mixing with the mud and blood. A single yellow petal clings to a strand of barbed wire, fluttering in the wind like a tiny flag of surrender. The weight of your lasgun pulls your arms downward, but it's more than physical exhaustion. It's the accumulated weight of every order followed, every friend lost, every compromise made in the name of duty and survival. 3 years of systematic dehumanization, 3 years of being told that you are nothing more than ammunition to be expended in service to an emperor you've never seen, on behalf of an Imperium that sees you as less than nothing. Your training screams at you to move. The neural pathways carved by months of brutal conditioning fire desperately, trying to override the rebellion growing in your mind. You can hear drill instructor Moravic's voice echoing from what feels like a lifetime ago. Doubt is heresy, hesitation is death, disobedience is damnation. The words that were beaten into your skull with fists and shock mauls and sleep deprivation now feel as distant as a half-remembered dream. 20 seconds. Commissar Vex's hand rests on his bolt pistol, the gesture casual but loaded with lethal promise. You've seen him use that weapon on 7 different occasions, each execution carried out with the same clinical precision as field stripping a weapon. No emotion, no hesitation, just the mechanical application of imperial justice. The man whose job it is to guard your soul has become the greatest threat to your life. 15 seconds. The guardsmen around you shift restlessly, checking their weapons with the unconscious efficiency of the thoroughly trained. They don't look at you, can't afford to look at you, because doubt is infectious, and infection must be contained. You can feel their fear like a physical presence, thick and choking. They're as terrified as you are, but their terror has been carefully channeled into obedience. Yours has become something else entirely. 10 seconds. You think of home, not the Cadia that was, but the Cadia that existed in your memories. Sunday mornings when your mother would make recaf from real beans instead of the synthetic paste. Your father teaching you to fish in the streams that ran clear and cold from the mountains. Your brother's laughter echoing through the Hab complex when he'd successfully pranked one of the older children. Simple moments that seemed infinite when you lived them and now feel as fragile as spun glass. 5 seconds. The realization hits you with the force of a lemon rust battle cannon. These men in the trench aren't the enemy. They were never the enemy. They were just like you, young, scared, trying to survive in a universe that had already decided their deaths were necessary for the continuation of something that had long since forgotten why it was worth continuing. 2 seconds. Your finger finds the safety of your lasgun, and instead of releasing it, you engage it. The small click is audible only to you, but it feels as loud as a thunder crack. It's the sound of a man choosing his own damnation rather than participating in someone else's. 1 second. Commissar Vex raises his hand, the signal for the charge. Around you, hundreds of men prepare to leap into hell because hell is where they've been ordered to go. Your legs refuse to move. Your body, trained to obey without question, rebels against 3 years of conditioning in a single moment of crystalline clarity. The words escape your lips before you can stop them, quiet but carrying the weight of absolute finality. I can't do it, sir. The silence that follows is more terrifying than any enemy fire. It's the silence of a universe that has suddenly noticed your existence and found it wanting. In that moment, you understand that you have crossed a line from which there is no return. You have chosen to be human in a galaxy that has no place for humanity. What could possibly drive a man to refuse orders when the penalty is death? How much horror can the human mind absorb before it shatters? Is there any humanity left in a universe that demands absolute obedience? These questions hang in the air around you like smoke from a funeral pyre, and you realize with growing dread that you are about to discover the answers. The mechanism of imperial justice is already turning its terrible attention toward you, and nothing, not your years of service, not your loyalty, not your soul itself, will be sufficient to save you from what comes next. To understand the magnitude of what you've just done, you must first understand the system that created you, and the system that will now destroy you. The Astra Militarum, known to those within it as the Imperial Guard, is not merely an army. It is the physical manifestation of humanity's will to survive, a machine so vast and terrible that individual lives become nothing more than calculations in an equation that spans the galaxy. You were not born to be Private Korvax. You were manufactured. The process began long before your birth, on a world where industrial capacity was measured not in factories or resources, but in the number of human beings it could produce per year. Cadia was a fortress world, its entire civilization organized around a single principle: the creation of soldiers. Every aspect of daily life, from the food rations distributed to pregnant mothers to the lullabies sung to children, was designed to produce human beings capable of killing and dying efficiently for the Emperor. Your education began in the Schola Progenium, though to call it education is to fundamentally misunderstand its purpose. Education implies the development of critical thinking, creativity, individual growth. What you received was programming. From the age of 6, you learned that your life had value only in proportion to your willingness to sacrifice it. You memorized the Imperial Creed not as religious doctrine, but as operational parameters. The Emperor Protects became less a statement of faith and more a trigger phrase, conditioning your nervous system to suppress fear responses when faced with overwhelming danger. The instructors at the Schola were not teachers, but engineers, carefully crafting human weapons through a process that was equal parts science and art. Physical conditioning broke down your body so it could be rebuilt stronger, but psychological conditioning broke down your mind so it could be rebuilt simpler. Complex thoughts that might lead to doubt were identified and systematically eliminated. Emotional responses that might interfere with duty were cataloged and suppressed. By the time you graduated, you were no longer entirely human. You were a hybrid creature, part man and part machine, capable of function in conditions that would drive a normal person to madness. The commissariat existed to ensure this conditioning held under extreme stress. Commissar Vex, the man who now stares at you with eyes like winter, was trained from birth to identify the subtle signs of wavering loyalty. His bolt pistol has ended more Imperial lives than enemy action ever will, and each execution serves a dual purpose, eliminating the infection of doubt while reinforcing the conditioning of those who witness it. He is simultaneously your protector, ensuring your soul remains pure, and your executioner, ensuring your body remains useful only as long as your soul does. But even the most sophisticated conditioning has limits, and the Imperium has designed systems to account for this. The scale of expendability built into Imperial doctrine is difficult for minds raised in peacetime to comprehend. On a typical campaign, casualty rates of 90% are considered acceptable if strategic objectives are met. Entire regiments are written off as acceptable losses before the first shot is fired. The mathematics are elegant in their brutality. It is cheaper to manufacture new soldiers than to preserve existing ones. Your regiment, the 47th Cadian Shock Troops, began this campaign with 12,000 men. You are among the 437 still breathing. This is not considered a failure of command, but a sign of successful resource utilization. The dead serve their purpose by dying in the right place at the right time. The living serve their purpose by continuing to die until the objectives are achieved. There is no third category. The enemies you face make this mathematical approach to human life seem almost reasonable. Chaos Space Marines who have traded their humanity for power beyond mortal comprehension. Orcs whose idea of diplomacy is determining whether to eat you before or after they kill you. Tyranids that view your entire species as nothing more than biomass to be consumed. In a galaxy populated by such horrors, the Imperium's casual brutality toward its own people can almost be justified as necessary pragmatism. Almost. You were born on Cadia in the year 987. M41, in a HAB block designated Manufacturing Complex Delta 7. Your parents were both veterans of the 13th Black Crusade, survivors who had earned the right to reproduce through their exemplary service. Your genetic profile was analyzed before you drew your first breath, your potential as a soldier calculated down to statistical probabilities. The decision to allow you to live rather than culling you for substandard genetics was made by a servitor skull that had never experienced a single human emotion. Your childhood was structured around preparation for military service. Games taught tactical thinking. Physical activities built endurance and pain tolerance. Even your toys were miniature weapons, teaching your hands the proper grip and balance long before you understood what killing meant. By age 10, you could field strip a lasgun blindfolded. By 12, you could calculate artillery trajectories in your head. By 14, you had killed your first human being, a traitor who was actually a child actor, the execution stage to desensitize you to taking human life. Your dreams, when the conditioning allowed you to have them, were simple. You wanted to see other worlds, to experience something beyond the endless cycle of training and preparation. You wanted to matter, to be more than just another cog in the vast machine of Imperial war. You wanted to come home to people who would remember your name and mourn your passing. These dreams were not forbidden. The commissars understood that some hope was necessary to maintain morale, but they were carefully managed, channeled into forms that served imperial purposes rather than individual fulfillment. The day you left Cadia, you carried with you a small remembrance from your brother, a piece of stone from the fortress walls, carved into the rough shape of an aquila. It was crude work, the kind of thing a child might make with stolen tools and desperate hope. You've carried it through every battle since, a tangible link to the person you were before the Imperium finished its work on you. The stone is smooth now, worn down by countless hours of nervous handling, and sometimes you catch yourself wondering if your soul has been worn down in the same way. The transport ships that carried your regiment away from Cadia were designed with the same casual disregard for human life that characterizes all Imperial technology. You were packed into cargo holds like ammunition, 4 men to a space designed for 1. The journey took 8 months, during which 17% of your regiment died from disease, malnutrition, or despair. These deaths were also considered acceptable losses. It was better to discover psychological weaknesses during transport than during combat. Your first taste of actual warfare came on Mordian Tertius, a world whose strategic value was measured not in resources or population, but in its position relative to more important worlds. The entire campaign was a holding action, designed to delay an Orc advance for the 6 months needed to evacuate more valuable assets from more important systems. You spent 18 months fighting and dying for a world that the Imperium had already decided to abandon, and when the evacuation finally came, the survivors were told that their sacrifice had been crucial to Imperial victory. It was a lie. But lies, you learned, were just another form of ammunition in the Imperial arsenal, as necessary for morale as La's packs were for combat effectiveness. Each subsequent campaign brought new horrors, new compromises, new erosions of whatever humanity you had left. You watched friends die for objectives that were abandoned the next day. You followed orders that made no tactical sense because questioning orders was a form of heresy. You killed enemies who might have been reasoned with, and civilians who might have been innocent, because mercy was a luxury that the Imperium could not afford. And through it all, the conditioning held. The neural pathways carved by years of training kept you functional, kept you loyal, kept you useful. Until today, when something deeper than conditioning finally rebelled against the machine that had created you. The Imperium that demands your obedience has spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of creating soldiers like you. It has refined the process through countless trials, eliminating inefficiencies and maximizing output. What it has created is perhaps the most effective military force in human history, and perhaps the least human military force ever conceived. You are the product of this system, Private Korvax, but now, in refusing orders, you have become its enemy, and the Imperium has had 10,000 years to perfect the art of dealing with its enemies. The moment your words leave your lips, time seems to fracture. The universe, which had been moving at the frantic pace of impending battle, suddenly slows to an almost geological crawl. You can see individual raindrops suspended in the air like crystal beads, each one catching the light from the artillery flashes in the distance. The sound of your own heartbeat becomes thunderous, drowning out even the constant rumble of the war that rages around you. Commissar Vex has served for 30 years. He has executed 743 men for cowardice, and each time he has told himself it was necessary. Each time, he has pulled the trigger with the mechanical precision that his own training demands, watching human beings transform from living souls into cooling meat with the same emotional detachment a tech adept might show when replacing a faulty cogitator. But today, looking into your eyes that remind him in some deep and uncomfortable way of his own son who died in the siege of Tertiary Hive Gamma, His hand hesitates on his bolt pistol. The hesitation lasts only a fraction of a second, but in that tiny eternity, you see something you've never seen before in a commissar's face: uncertainty. Not doubt about the righteousness of imperial doctrine, but a momentary crack in the armor of absolute conviction, a flash of the human being that still exists somewhere beneath the layers of indoctrination and duty. It's gone almost immediately, replaced by the cold mask of imperial authority. But for that brief moment, you understand that even commissars are human beings forced to choose between their humanity and their survival. The silence stretches like a taut wire, and you become hyper-aware of everything around you. The smell of cordite and human waste is overlaid now with something sharper, the acrid scent of fear sweat, not just your own but that of every man within earshot. Guardsmen who were preparing to charge into certain death moments ago now face something even more terrifying: the possibility that the chain of command itself might be fallible, that the system that has kept them alive through conditioning and cruel discipline might be cracking under the weight of its own contradictions. Trooper Valdris, who sleeps 2 bunks down from you, takes an unconscious half-step backward. His lasgun wavers in his grip, and you can see the whites of his eyes as his gaze darts between you and the commissar. Valdris is 19 years old, conscripted from an agri-world where his greatest worry had been whether the grain harvest would be sufficient to meet the imperial tithe. Now he's faced with a scenario his training never prepared him for. What happens when a fellow soldier becomes the enemy? The sound of weapons being drawn creates a symphony of metallic clicks that seems to echo from every direction. Bolt pistols clearing holsters, chainswords growling to life, the distinctive whine of La's weapons charging to full power. The sound is familiar. You've heard it countless times before enemy engagements, but hearing it directed at you creates a terror so profound that your legs nearly give out. These are men you've bled with, shared your rations with, told stories to during the long watches of the night. Now they're preparing to kill you, and the worst part is that you understand why they have to. Commissar Vex's voice, when it finally comes, is perfectly controlled, each word measured and precise. Private Korvax, you will repeat your last statement for the record. The formal phrasing tells you everything you need to know. This is no longer a conversation between a soldier and his superior officer. This is the beginning of an official proceeding, the first step in a process that has been refined over 10,000 years of imperial justice. Every word you speak from this moment forward will be recorded, analyzed, and used to determine not just your fate, but the fate of everyone associated with you. Your mouth is dry as parchment, and when you try to swallow, it feels like your throat is full of sand. The words come out as barely more than a whisper. I said I can't do it, sir. I can't charge into that trench. The commissar's hand moves to his bolt pistol, not drawing it but resting his palm on the grip in a gesture that every guardsman recognizes as the prelude to execution. But instead of drawing the weapon, he speaks again, and his words carry the weight of inevitability. Private Korvax, you are hereby charged with cowardice in the face of the enemy, a crime punishable by summary execution under the authority vested in me by the God Emperor of mankind. Do you have anything to say in your defense? The question is not really a question. It's a formality, a box to be checked in the process of transforming a human being into a cautionary tale. But as you stand there surrounded by the tools of your own destruction, you find yourself thinking not about defense but about truth. The truth of what you've seen, what you've done, what you've been asked to become in service to an empire that has forgotten why it exists. They were our own men, sir, you say, your voice growing stronger as the words spill out. In that trench, Kellem and Morrison and Davies and all the rest, they were wounded, sir. They were calling for medics. And we were ordered to use their bodies as cover for the advance. The effect of your words on the assembled soldiers is immediate and electric. You can see recognition flicker across faces, the uncomfortable acknowledgement of a truth that everyone present knows, but no one has been willing to speak aloud. The wounded men in the trench weren't obstacles to be overcome. They were friends, brothers, human beings whose only crime was surviving long enough to become inconvenient. Commissar Vex's face remains impassive, but you notice the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible tension in his jaw. He knows what you've said is true, just as he knows that truth is irrelevant in the face of imperial doctrine. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and the needs of the Imperium outweigh the needs of everyone. The tactical situation required immediate advance, the Commissar states, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. The wounded were beyond medical assistance, and their positions provided necessary cover for the assault. Your refusal to follow orders has compromised the mission and endangered the lives of your fellow soldiers. It's all true, in the same way that stating facts about ammunition expenditure or supply consumption is true. But it's also completely meaningless, a reduction of human suffering to tactical considerations that strips away everything that makes life worth living. You've just watched the imperial system perform its greatest magic trick, transforming moral horror into logistical necessity with nothing more than the proper application of doctrine. The ripple effect of your refusal spreads through the assembled soldiers like a contagion. You can see it in their faces, the doubt, the questions they're not allowed to ask, the growing realization that they too have participated in atrocities that their training taught them to see as duty. Some of them are looking at you with hatred, angry that you forced them to confront truths they've spent years avoiding. Others look at you with something that might be gratitude, as if your words have given voice to thoughts they've carried in silence for months or years. But most of them look at you with fear. Because if you can break, if someone as thoroughly conditioned as a Cadian shock trooper can reach a point where conscience overrides training, then what does that say about the stability of the system that has kept them alive? What does that say about the reliability of the very foundations upon which their survival depends? Sergeant Korath, a 20-year veteran whose scarred face has never shown anything but iron discipline, steps forward and raises his lasgun to his shoulder, the muzzle trained directly at your chest. His finger is inside the trigger guard, and you can see the slight tremor in his hands that betrays the emotional cost of what he's being asked to do. Korath once pulled you from a collapsed bunker under heavy fire, risking his own life to save yours. Now he's preparing to end your life to save the system that has shaped both of you. "Request permission to carry out sentence, sir," Korath says, his voice steady but his eyes reflecting a pain that cuts deeper than any physical wound. Commissar Vex nods slowly, but instead of giving the order to fire, he speaks words that chill your blood. "Negative, Sergeant. This matter requires investigation. Private Korvax will be detained pending formal tribunal." The decision to delay your execution is not mercy. It's something far worse. It means that the commissariat believes your defection might be symptomatic of a larger problem, a crack in the conditioning that could spread to other soldiers if not properly understood and contained. It means that your refusal has been classified not as individual cowardice, but as potential heresy, with all the terrible implications that classification carries. As the restraints are applied to your wrists, heavy manacles that bite into your skin with each movement, you realize that you've just crossed from the world of the living into a realm where death would be a mercy. The imperial justice system has taken notice of you, and its attention is the most terrible thing a human being can experience in the 41st millennium. The last thing you see as they drag you away is the face of Trooper Valdris, the boy from the agri world who still dreams of home. His expression is a mixture of terror and pity, and you realize that he's not just watching your fate. He's seeing a preview of his own, should he ever find the courage or desperation to follow your example. The war continues around you as you march toward detention, the sound of artillery and La's fire providing a constant reminder that the imperial machine never stops, never pauses, never hesitates to consume the lives of those who serve it. Your refusal has changed nothing except your own position within that machine, from useful component to dangerous malfunction, from asset to liability, from human being to problem to be solved. and the Imperium has had 10,000 years to perfect its methods of problem-solving. The holding cell is a converted supply closet in the depths of the command bunker, barely large enough for you to lie down with your knees drawn up to your chest. The walls are ferrocrete stained with moisture and something darker that you prefer not to contemplate too closely. Every surface is covered in scratch marks, tally marks of previous occupants counting their final days, prayers to the Emperor carved with fingernails and desperate hope, and curses so profane that they seem to writhe in the dim light cast by a single, failing glow strip. You trace the scratches with your fingertips, feeling the desperation embedded in each gouge. Here, someone carved "Emperor preserve my soul" in Gothic script so precise it must have taken hours to complete. There, another prisoner scratched "innocent" over and over until the word became meaningless repetition. In one corner, barely visible, someone managed to carve an entire prayer to Saint Celestine before their time ran out. You wonder how many of these voices belonged to men who had committed crimes no worse than your own, the crime of retaining enough humanity to recognize horror when they saw it. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of human waste, fear sweat, and something deeper, more primal. It's the smell of despair made manifest, the odor that clings to places where hope goes to die. Your stomach churns constantly, whether from hunger, fear, or the simple biological reaction to prolonged stress. You cannot tell. Food, when it comes, arrives in the form of nutrient paste dispensed through a slot in the door. It tastes like salted cardboard and has the consistency of wet clay, but you force yourself to eat it because maintaining your strength is the only form of defiance left available to you. Sleep, when it comes, brings no relief. The nightmares that plague your rest are not memories of battle or visions of the enemies you've faced, but scenes of home that have been twisted into accusations. You dream of your brother's face, but instead of the laughter you remember, his eyes hold nothing but disappointment and shame. You dream of your mother's embrace, but her arms feel like restraints, holding you in place while faceless figures pronounce your guilt. You dream of Cadia's purple sky, but the stars spell out your crimes in letters of fire. On the third day, or what you think is the third day, since the absence of natural light makes time meaningless, they come for you. The interrogation chamber is larger than your cell but somehow more claustrophobic. The walls are lined with instruments whose purposes you can only guess at, though their intent is unmistakably sinister. Psychic dampeners hum in the corners, creating a sensation like pressure behind your eyes and a constant low-level headache that makes clear thinking nearly impossible. The chair they strap you into is designed to be uncomfortable in ways that extend beyond mere physical pain. The angles are wrong, the restraints positioned to create maximum psychological stress while leaving no permanent physical damage. Your interrogator introduces himself as Inquisitor Valding, though you suspect that name is as false as everything else about this process. He is a thin man with pale skin and eyes the color of winter storms, and when he speaks, his voice carries the kind of authority that comes from absolute certainty in one's own righteousness. He wears the rosette of his office like a badge of divine approval, and you understand immediately that to him, you are not a human being with rights or dignity, but a problem to be solved through the application of proper technique. Private Korvax, he begins, consulting a data slate that presumably contains every detail of your life from birth to the moment of your arrest. You stand accused of cowardice in the face of the enemy, disobedience of lawful orders, and potential corruption by the ruinous powers. These are serious charges that carry serious consequences. However, cooperation with this investigation may result in considerations regarding the nature of your punishment. The offer of leniency is bait, and you both know it. There is no leniency in imperial justice for crimes like yours. There are only different methods of execution, some quicker than others. But the human mind, even one trained to accept death as inevitable, clings to hope with desperate tenacity. Part of you, despite everything you know about how this will end, allows itself to believe that cooperation might lead to something other than a bolt round to the brain. The questions begin simply enough. Your name, your unit, your service record. Basic information that they already know but ask anyway, establishing a baseline for their psychic probes and truth detection equipment. Your answers are recorded by servoskulls that hover around the chamber like mechanical vultures, their sensors analyzing every microexpression, every hesitation, every physiological response for signs of deception or heresy. But as the interrogation progresses, the questions become more invasive, more personal. They want to know about your childhood, your relationships, your dreams and fears and secret thoughts. They dissect your memories with surgical precision, looking for the moment when corruption entered your soul, the instant when you became something other than a perfect Imperial soldier. "Tell me about your brother," Inquisitor Valding says, and his voice carries a casual interest that chills you more than any threat could. "Describe your relationship with him. What did you talk about? What games did you play? Did he ever express unconventional thoughts about Imperial doctrine?" The implications are clear. Your refusal to follow orders has marked not just you but everyone associated with you as potentially compromised. Your family, your friends, anyone who might have influenced your psychological development is now under suspicion. The Imperium's paranoia is so complete that even the innocent act of loving your brother becomes evidence of possible heresy. You try to protect him with your answers, painting him as the perfect Imperial citizen, loyal and unquestioning in his faith. But you can see in the Inquisitor's eyes that your efforts are futile. The investigation will spread like a cancer, consuming everyone it touches regardless of their actual guilt or innocence. Your moment of defiance has doomed not just yourself, but everyone you've ever cared about. The psychic probing begins on the 4th day of interrogation. They bring in a sanctioned psyker, a hollow-eyed woman whose mind has been surgically altered to serve as a tool of Imperial investigation. She places her hands on your temples, and suddenly your thoughts are no longer your own. The violation is more complete than any physical torture could be. She rifles through your memories like files in a cabinet, examining your most private moments with clinical detachment. Under psychic examination, lies become impossible. The carefully constructed answers you've prepared crumble like sand, leaving your thoughts naked and vulnerable. The psyker extracts memories you've tried to forget, moments of doubt during training, instances when you questioned orders but obeyed anyway, dreams of a different life that might have been possible in a different universe. Each extracted thought becomes evidence in the case being built against you. "Interesting," Inquisitor Valding murmurs as he reviews the psychic interrogation reports. "You've harbored doubts about Imperial doctrine for quite some time, haven't you, Private? These thoughts of yours. They suggest a pattern of ideological corruption that predates your recent disobedience by several years. It's a trap dressed up as an observation. Every human being who has lived through the horrors of Imperial military service has harbored doubts. The alternative would be complete insanity. But admitting to those doubts is tantamount to confessing to heresy, while denying them in the face of psychic evidence is proof of deliberate deception. There is no safe answer, no path that leads anywhere but deeper into the machinery of Imperial justice. The trial, when it finally comes, is a foregone conclusion disguised as due process. The tribunal consists of 3 officers whose names you never learn, and whose faces remain hidden behind ceremonial masks. They sit behind a high bench carved with Imperial eagles and skulls, symbols of authority and death intertwined in a way that makes their verdict clear before the first charge is read. Your defender is a junior officer barely out of the schola who approaches his assignment with the enthusiasm of a man asked to argue that gravity flows upward. He makes the required motions, presenting evidence of your service record, citing regulations regarding combat stress, requesting clemency based on your previous loyalty, but his heart isn't in it. He knows, as everyone in the chamber knows, that this trial exists not to determine your guilt, but to provide a legal framework for your inevitable execution. The witnesses called against you are men from your own unit, guardsmen who served alongside you, and who now struggle to reconcile their memories of shared hardship with the necessities of imperial justice. Sergeant Korath testifies about your recent behavioral changes, describing moments of hesitation and thousand-yard stares that he now presents as evidence of developing cowardice. His words are technically accurate but stripped of all context, transformed from the natural psychological responses of a combat veteran into proof of moral weakness. Trooper Valdris, the boy from the agri-world, is forced to recount conversations you had during long watches, casual exchanges about home and family that are now presented as evidence of insufficient loyalty to the imperial cause. You watch his face as he speaks, and you can see the guilt and confusion there, the struggle of a decent human being forced to participate in the destruction of someone he considers a friend. His testimony damns you, but you find yourself feeling sorry for him rather than angry. He's as much a victim of this system as you are. The chaplain who testifies speaks about the spiritual corruption that leads to cowardice, describing your actions as symptomatic of a soul that has turned away from the Emperor's light. His words carry the weight of religious authority, transforming your moment of human conscience into evidence of heretical thinking. Under imperial doctrine, there is no meaningful distinction between moral objection to atrocity and worship of chaos. Both represent rejection of imperial truth, and both carry the same penalty. When the verdict is announced, you feel something like relief. The waiting is over, the uncertainty ended. You will be executed by firing squad at dawn, your death serving as both punishment for your crimes and example to others who might be tempted to follow your path. The sentence is read in the same tone that might be used to announce the weather forecast, bureaucratic efficiency applied to the business of ending human life. As they lead you back to your cell to await execution, you catch sight of Commissar Vex standing in the corridor. He watches you pass with an expression you cannot read, and for a moment, you wonder if he's thinking about the hesitation you saw in his eyes that day on the battlefield. Does he remember what it felt like to be human? Does he ever question the system he serves so faithfully? Or has the conditioning that created him eliminated such thoughts as thoroughly as your execution will eliminate you? The answer, you realize, doesn't matter. In the morning, you will die. But tonight, for the first time since your arrest, you sleep without nightmares. Because tomorrow, one way or another, your suffering will end, while the system that created that suffering will continue, fed by the blood of men like you, sustained by the silence of men like Commissar Vex, justified by the fear of men like Trooper Valdris. The Imperium's justice is perfect in its efficiency, terrible in its certainty, and absolute in its finality. And you are about to become its newest example of why defiance is futile, and obedience is the only path to grace. Even though that grace comes at the end of a lasgun barrel, even though that obedience requires the death of everything that makes you human. Dawn comes to the military compound like a reluctant witness, pale and sickly through the smoke and ash that perpetually shroud this world. The execution ground is a flat expanse of ferrocrete behind the command bunker, stained dark with the blood of previous ceremonies. As you're marched toward your death, your boots splash through puddles that reflect the gray sky above, and you try not to think about how many of those puddles contain more than rainwater. The entire regiment has been assembled in formation, 3,000 men arranged in perfect ranks, their faces carefully blank, their eyes focused on the middle distance rather than on you. This is not mere spectacle but essential psychology. Every man present must witness what happens to those who place individual conscience above imperial doctrine. They must see, remember, and internalize the lesson that your death will teach. You're forced to kneel in the center of the formation, your hands bound behind your back with restraints that cut into your wrists with each movement. The ferrocrete is cold against your knees, cold enough that you can feel it through the fabric of your uniform. Above you, the sky is the color of old bones, and you find yourself thinking absurdly about whether your brother ever looked up at this same gray emptiness from wherever they sent him after Cadia fell. Commissar Vex stands before the assembled troops, his bolt pistol gleaming in its holster, his voice carrying across the formation with the authority of absolute certainty. He reads your crimes from a scroll that seems to go on forever: cowardice in the face of the enemy, disobedience of lawful orders, corruption of unit morale, failure to maintain proper imperial faith. Each charge is technically accurate and completely meaningless legal terminology applied to the simple act of being human in a universe that has no place for humanity. But you're not listening to the words anymore. Instead, you're watching the faces of your fellow guardsmen, seeing your own fear and despair reflected in their eyes. Trooper Valdris stands in the front rank, his young face pale with shock and barely suppressed nausea. He keeps glancing at you and then looking away, as if direct eye contact might somehow make him complicit in what's happening. Sergeant Korath maintains perfect military bearing, but you can see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands that betrays the emotional cost of witnessing the execution of a man he once saved from enemy fire. The selection of your executioners was not random. 5 men from your own squad have been chosen to form the firing squad, men who served alongside you, shared rations with you, fought beside you in a dozen different hells. This too is part of the lesson. Loyalty to the Imperium must supersede all personal bonds, all human feeling, all individual conscience. Your friends will kill you because the alternative is to join you in death, and the system that demands this choice considers it not cruel but necessary. Private Hoskin, a quiet man from a forge world who once shared his last stick of low with you during a 3-day siege, checks his lasgun with mechanical precision. His face is a mask of professional detachment, but his hands shake slightly as he adjusts the weapon settings. Next to him, Corporal Thane, who pulled you from the wreckage of your transport when it took a direct hit from Orc artillery, stares straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of a man trying to divorce his mind from his actions. Any last words? Commissar Vex asks, and the question carries the weight of ritual rather than genuine interest. This too is part of the ceremony, an opportunity for the condemned to confess their guilt and reaffirm imperial doctrine in their final moments. Most do. The psychological pressure is enormous, and the hope that a proper confession might somehow change their fate dies hard, even when that hope is completely irrational. You look out at the assembled faces, 3,000 men who could be your brothers, your sons, your fathers. Men who have been shaped by the same system that shaped you, broken down and rebuilt according to imperial specifications. Men who will carry the memory of your death for the rest of their lives, however long those lives might be. And suddenly, you understand what your final words must be, not for yourself, because you are beyond salvation, but for them. I served the Emperor faithfully for 3 years, you say, your voice carrying clearly across the silent formation. I followed orders without question, killed his enemies without hesitation, died a little more each day in service to the Imperium. I'm not dying today because I was a coward. I'm dying because I remembered what it meant to be human. The effect of your words on the assembled troops is immediate and electric. You can see recognition flicker across faces, understanding dawn in eyes that have seen too much horror. These men know what you mean because they've felt it themselves. That moment when conscience rebels against conditioning, when the human spirit pushes back against the machine that has consumed it. Your words give voice to thoughts they've all had but never dared express, doubts they've all harbored but never acknowledged. Commissar Vex's face remains impassive, but you notice the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible tension in his posture. Your defiance has not ended with your confession. If anything, it has become more dangerous. Instead of providing a cautionary tale about the consequences of heretical thinking, your words threaten to inspire the very thoughts they were meant to suppress. Private Korvax has chosen to compound his crimes with blasphemy, the commissar announces, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Let his fate serve as a reminder that the Emperor's mercy extends only to those who embrace imperial truth in their final moments. The firing squad raises their weapons with synchronized precision, 5 lasguns trained on your chest. At this distance, the coherent energy beams will punch through your body armor as if it were paper, flash burning through flesh and bone to leave cauterized wounds that smell of cooked meat and ozone. Death will be almost instantaneous, a mercy, considering the alternatives available to Imperial justice. You close your eyes and think of home, not the Cadia that was destroyed by chaos, but the Cadia that lives in your memory. Your mother's face when she smiled, your father's hands teaching you to cast a fishing line, your brother's laughter echoing through empty corridors. Simple moments that seemed infinite when you lived them, precious beyond measure now that they can never be repeated. The command comes like a thunderclap, fire. The las beams converge on your chest in a brilliant flash of coherent energy. There is a moment of searing heat, a sensation like being struck by lightning, and then, nothing. Your body topples backward onto the cold ferrocrete, steam rising from the circular wounds that have punched through your torso, but you are no longer there to feel the impact. Private Korvax of the 47th Cadian shock troops dies as he lived, caught between the human being he was born to be and the weapon the Imperium shaped him into. His death serves multiple purposes: punishment for his crimes, deterrent to others who might consider similar acts of defiance, and reinforcement of the system that made his destruction inevitable. The psychological impact on the witnesses is carefully calculated. Some will be traumatized by the experience, their minds recoiling from the horror of watching a friend die for the crime of being human. These men will become more compliant, more willing to follow orders without question, more fearful of the consequences of independent thought. Others will be inspired to greater loyalty by the demonstration of Imperial justice, their faith in the system reinforced by its willingness to destroy those who threaten it. But a very few, will carry away a different lesson. They will remember your words, your refusal to recant, your insistence that humanity is worth preserving even in the face of death. These men represent the real danger, the possibility that your defiance might inspire others to similar acts of conscience. The commissariat knows this, which is why your execution is only the beginning of the process. After your body is removed, incinerated without ceremony, your ashes scattered to prevent any possibility of martyrdom, the real work begins. The men who witnessed your execution will be watched, evaluated, tested for signs of ideological corruption. Those who show symptoms of doubt or wavering loyalty will be transferred to penal units, subjected to additional indoctrination, or simply eliminated as potential threats to unit cohesion. Your friends in the firing squad face the worst psychological burden. They have been forced to kill someone they cared about, someone who saved their lives and shared their dangers. The guilt and trauma of this act will follow them for the rest of their lives, but they will not be allowed to process it in any way that might lead to questioning Imperial authority. Instead, they will be told that they performed their duty admirably, that their willingness to place loyalty above friendship is evidence of proper Imperial faith. The system that demanded your death operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Your execution serves as spectacle, reinforcing the power of Imperial authority through the display of overwhelming force. It functions as psychology, using fear and trauma to shape behavior and suppress dissent. It acts as theology, presenting obedience to Imperial doctrine as a sacred duty that supersedes all personal bonds and individual conscience. But perhaps most insidiously, it works as normalization. By making your friends kill you, by forcing your comrades to witness your death, by presenting your execution as necessary and proper, the system gradually erodes the psychological barriers that prevent ordinary people from participating in atrocity. Each act of violence becomes easier to accept. Each compromise of conscience becomes more natural. Each step toward complete dehumanization becomes inevitable. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war. But the most terrible battles are not fought against external enemies. They are fought in the human heart, between the person you were born to be and the weapon the Imperium needs you to become. Your death represents the final victory of that weapon over the person, the complete triumph of imperial necessity over human conscience. The rain begins to fall as your body is removed, washing your blood from the ferrocrete, but leaving the stain of your execution permanently etched in the memories of those who witnessed it. The war continues, the killing resumes, the great machine of imperial conquest grinds onward without pause. But somewhere in the ranks of the 47th Cadian shock troops, men carry the memory of a soldier who chose to be human in his final moments, who refused to let death rob him of the dignity that life had tried to steal. Whether that memory will inspire future acts of defiance or serve as a warning against the cost of conscience remains to be seen. But the Imperium, in its terrible wisdom, has prepared for both possibilities. The machine that creates soldiers like you has had 10,000 years to perfect its responses to every form of human resistance, every expression of individual will, every spark of the conscience that you died defending. Your death changes nothing, and yet, in the secret places of the human heart where hope refuses to die, it changes everything. Within 6 hours of your execution, the bureaucratic machinery of the Imperium begins the process of erasing you from history. Scribes hunched over ancient cogitators start deleting your service records, your personnel files, every official document that bears your name. The process is methodical, thorough, and utterly without emotion. Clerks who have never seen your face systematically eliminate any evidence that Private Korvax of the 47th Cadian shock troops ever existed. Your personal effects have already been incinerated in a furnace designed for hazardous waste disposal. The small stone aquila your brother carved for you, the only tangible link to the person you were before the Imperium finished its work on you, crumbles to ash alongside your letters from home, your few photographs, the pressed flower you kept from that agri-world where you first learned what it meant to take a human life. The flames consume not just objects but memories, not just possessions but pieces of your soul that might have provided comfort to someone who knew you. Your bunk in the barracks has been reassigned before your body finished cooling. A replacement guardsman, some nameless conscript from some forgotten world, will sleep where you slept, store his gear where you stored yours, and know nothing of the man whose place he has taken. The bed frame still bears the small scratches you made during sleepless nights, tiny marks invisible to anyone who doesn't know to look for them. These microscopic reminders of your existence will survive longer than any official record, but even they will fade as the metal wears smooth from use. The most chilling aspect of your erasure is not its speed but its completeness. In the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, there are procedures for everything, and the elimination of inconvenient personnel is no exception. Form 1847, Gamma, authorizes the removal of service records for personnel executed for cowardice. Form 2156, Delta, orders the redistribution of personal effects to Imperial supply depots. Form 4523, Alpha, mandates the psychological evaluation of all witnesses to determine their fitness for continued service. But perhaps the most insidious document is Form 7899 Theta, which authorizes the creation of alternative service records for deceased personnel whose actual history might prove problematic. According to the new files being generated by servitors who work through the night, Private Korvax died heroically in combat against Chaos forces, his last words a prayer to the Emperor, his final act a grenade throw that eliminated 3 enemy positions. This fabricated heroism serves multiple purposes. It provides closure for any family members who might inquire about your fate, while simultaneously creating a useful propaganda tool for recruiting new soldiers. The men who witnessed your execution face a different kind of erasure. They are not killed. That would be wasteful. But they are processed through a system designed to ensure that their memories of your defiance cannot inspire similar acts in others. Memory conditioning, administered through a combination of psychic manipulation and chemical therapy, softens the sharp edges of recollection. What they remember will still be traumatic. The system wants them to fear the consequences of disobedience, but the specifics that might make you seem sympathetic or heroic will fade like dreams upon waking. Trooper Valdris, the boy from the agri-world who reminded you of your brother, undergoes 6 sessions of therapeutic intervention, designed to help him process the trauma of witnessing an execution. Each session carefully reinforces the official narrative while undermining any emotional connection he might have felt to you as a person. By the end of the process, he will remember watching the execution of a coward and traitor, not the death of a friend who chose conscience over survival. The members of your firing squad face the most intensive reconditioning. Private Hoskin, who shared his last low stick with you, spends 3 weeks in a Medici facility while specialists work to compartmentalize his memories of your friendship away from his memories of your execution. When he emerges, he will still remember killing you. The system wants him to carry that burden as proof of his loyalty, but he will no longer remember why it was difficult. Sergeant Korath, the veteran who once saved your life and then condemned you with his testimony, proves more resistant to memory conditioning. His 20 years of service have given him psychological defenses that protect the core of his identity from casual manipulation. The specialists recommend transfer to a penal battalion where the trauma of constant combat will accomplish what their techniques cannot. The gradual erosion of specific memories under the weight of newer, more immediate horrors. The ripple effects of your erasure extend far beyond your immediate unit. The administratum clerks who processed your execution orders are themselves subject to memory conditioning, ensuring that they retain no details about the case beyond the basic facts required for statistical reporting. The judges who condemned you are rotated to different assignments, their own memories of your trial lost in the endless parade of similar cases they process. Even Commissar Vex receives debriefing, sessions designed to reinforce his faith in the necessity of his actions, while eliminating any doubts that your final words might have planted. Back on your homeworld, or what remains of it after Cadia's destruction, your family receives notification of your heroic death in the form of a standard condolence letter. The document praises your courage, your loyalty, your unwavering faith in the Emperor's protection. It describes a fictional last battle that never happened, quotes words you never spoke, and transforms your desperate act of conscience into a tale of martial glory. Your mother will mourn a hero rather than a martyr. Your surviving relatives will take pride in your sacrifice rather than shame in your defiance. But not everyone can be silenced through official channels. In the hidden spaces where soldiers gather away from the eyes of commissars and the ears of informants, whispers begin to spread. Guardsmen who were not present at your execution, but who knew you before your arrest begin to piece together fragments of the truth. They remember your character, your actions, the man you were before the system decided you needed to die. These memories, passed from soldier to soldier in the careful code of the truly desperate, begin to create a counter-narrative to the official story. The underground network of dissent within the Imperial Guard is vast, invisible, and utterly powerless. It consists of shared glances between guardsmen who have seen too much, careful conversations in moments when surveillance is impossible, and the gradual accumulation of small truths that contradict official doctrine. Your story becomes part of this hidden history, not the heroic death described in official records, but the real death of a real man who chose to be human in a universe that demanded he become something else. Intelligence reports begin to circulate through commissariat channels, warning of ideological contamination within certain guard units. Your execution, rather than ending the problem of doubt and defiance, has created a more subtle and dangerous form of resistance. The truth of what you did and why you did it cannot be completely erased because it resonates with experiences that every veteran guard unit has shared. The question becomes not whether similar incidents will occur, but how to prevent them from spreading when they do. The solution, developed by specialists in the Ordo Hereticus and refined through decades of practice, is elegant in its simplicity. Future cases of refusal or defiance will not be treated as individual failures, but as evidence of unit-wide corruption. Entire companies will be disbanded, their personnel scattered across different regiments and different battlefronts. The collective punishment serves both as deterrent and as practical solution. It becomes impossible for underground networks to form when their potential members are separated by light years and assigned to units with no shared history. Your replacement arrives within a week of your execution, a young conscript from a hive world whose recruitment records describe him as ideologically reliable and psychologically compliant. He knows nothing of your existence, nothing of the circumstances that led to his assignment, nothing of the man whose place he has taken. His ignorance is not accidental but essential. He represents not just a new soldier but a new beginning, a clean slate unmarked by the doubts and questions that led to your destruction. The war machine continues its advance, consuming lives and worlds with the same mechanical efficiency it displayed before your brief moment of defiance. Tactical reports describe minor gains and acceptable losses. Supply requisitions detail ammunition expenditure and equipment replacement. Casualty reports reduce human suffering to statistical abstractions. Nowhere in this vast bureaucracy of death is there any mention of the human cost of maintaining a system that demands the destruction of everything that makes existence worthwhile. But in the secret places where memory refuses to die, your story survives. It survives in the careful silences of men who knew you, in the shared understanding of veterans who recognize truth when they hear it, in the gradual accumulation of small acts of conscience that add up to something larger than their individual parts. The Imperium can erase your name from official records, but it cannot erase the example you set or the questions your death raised. The great tragedy is that this survival changes nothing. The system that killed you is too vast, too entrenched, too essential to human survival to be threatened by individual acts of defiance or underground networks of dissent. Your death serves its intended purpose regardless of how many people remember the truth. It reinforces the power of imperial authority while demonstrating the futility of resistance. The machine that creates soldiers like you has processed millions of similar cases over 10,000 years of human history, and it will process millions more before the grim darkness finally ends. In the end, you become what every individual becomes in the face of institutional power: a footnote to be forgotten, a statistic to be filed away, a cautionary tale to be invoked when necessary and ignored when convenient. The Imperium moves on because it must, because stopping would mean acknowledging that 10,000 years of atrocity might have been for nothing, because admitting error would require confronting truths too terrible for even the most fanatical minds to contemplate. Your erasure is complete, your legacy contained, your example neutralized. The war continues, the killing resumes, the great machine grinds onward, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, another young soldier puts on the uniform and takes the oath and begins the long journey toward the moment when he too must choose between his humanity and his survival. The cycle is eternal, the outcome inevitable, the cost incalculable, and the Imperium calls this victory. In your final moments, as the Laz beams converged on your chest and consciousness began to fade, you experienced a revelation that cut through 30,000 years of imperial doctrine like a chainsword through flesh. The most terrifying truth was not that the Imperium would kill you for refusing orders. You had known that from the moment the words left your lips. The horror was deeper, more fundamental, more complete than simple execution. The Imperium doesn't just demand your death, it demands your willing participation in your own dehumanization. You are not a person to be saved, but a resource to be consumed. This understanding crystallized as you knelt on the execution ground, surrounded by men who had been transformed into perfect instruments of imperial will. Each face in that formation represented not an individual human being, but a successful conversion, a complex, thinking, feeling person reduced to a biological machine capable of killing and dying on command. The true enemy was not chaos, not the Xenos, not even the horrors that prowled the darkness between stars. The true enemy was the system itself, which had become so monstrous in its pursuit of survival that it had destroyed everything worth surviving for. The Imperial war machine has spent 10 millennia perfecting the art of human conversion. It takes children from their families, subjects them to systematic trauma designed to break their individual will, rebuilds their psychology around concepts of duty and obedience and sacrifice, and then feeds them into a meat grinder that spans the galaxy. The process is so refined, so thorough, so complete that its products no longer recognize themselves as victims. They see their suffering as necessary, their exploitation as honor, their destruction as glory. Consider the mathematics of imperial expenditure. In the campaign that consumed your regiment, 4 billion human beings died to secure a single star system of marginal strategic value. 4 billion individuals, each with their own dreams and fears and loves and hopes, transformed into casualty statistics in a report that no one will read and no one will remember. The administratum clerks who processed those numbers felt no more emotion than they would cataloging the loss of Laz packs or ration bars. Human life has become the cheapest resource in the imperial arsenal because humans can be manufactured more easily than las guns. But the true horror runs deeper than mere expendability. The Imperium has not simply chosen to treat human beings as resources. It has systematically eliminated the qualities that made them human in the first place. Compassion becomes weakness to be purged. Individual thought becomes heresy to be suppressed. Love becomes a liability that compromises efficiency. Art, beauty, joy, wonder, all the things that make existence more than mere survival, are sacrificed on the altar of necessity until nothing remains but the hollow shell of species that has forgotten why it wanted to survive. The system creates its own justification through a process of circular logic that would be laughable if it weren't so effective. Humanity must be protected from its enemies, so human rights must be suspended. Individual freedom threatens collective security, so freedom must be eliminated. People might make bad choices if allowed to choose, so choice itself becomes a luxury the species cannot afford. Each compromise makes the next compromise easier until compromise itself becomes the only remaining value. You realized, in those final moments, that the Imperium's greatest victory was not military but psychological. It convinced its victims to embrace their own victimization. The guardsmen who executed you believed they were performing a sacred duty rather than committing murder. The judges who condemned you saw themselves as guardians of justice rather than instruments of oppression. The system that destroyed you did so with the enthusiastic cooperation of its own victims, who had been trained to see their exploitation as privilege and their suffering as honor. The ultimate irony becomes clear when you examine what the Imperium claims to defend. Humanity's survival, they say, depends on absolute obedience to imperial doctrine. Human civilization must be preserved through the elimination of human rights. The species must be protected by destroying everything that makes the species worth protecting. It is a perfect trap, a self-perpetuating cycle of violence that justifies its own existence through the threat of the violence it creates. The Imperium has not saved humanity from becoming monsters. It has turned humanity into the worst monster the galaxy has ever seen. Chaos corrupts individuals, turning them into slaves of dark gods and alien desires. But the Imperium corrupts entire civilizations, transforming the human capacity for love and creativity and growth into weapons of systematic oppression. A chaos cultist retains enough individuality to choose damnation. An imperial citizen has had their capacity for choice so thoroughly eliminated that they cannot even recognize their own enslavement. The real tragedy is not that resistance is futile, though it is, but that resistance has been made unthinkable. The conditioning process is so complete, the indoctrination so thorough, that most imperial citizens cannot conceive of alternatives to the system that oppresses them. They see the galaxy's horrors as proof that imperial methods are necessary rather than evidence that imperial methods have failed. They interpret their suffering as natural law rather than artificial construction. They have been trained to love their chains and call their prison home. Your moment of refusal was significant not because it changed anything. It didn't. But because it proved that change remains theoretically possible. Somewhere beneath the layers of conditioning and trauma and systematic abuse, the human spirit endures. It can be suppressed, redirected, exploited, but not completely eliminated. Your defiance was proof that consciousness survives even the most sophisticated attempts to erase it, that conscience persists even under conditions designed to make conscience impossible. But this small victory comes with a crushing revelation. The survival of human consciousness is precisely what makes imperial oppression so effective. The system requires thinking beings capable of complex reasoning and emotional responses, because mindless automata could not perform the intricate tasks required to maintain galactic civilization. The Imperium needs humans who are human enough to function, but not human enough to rebel. It needs citizens who can create and build and love while remaining incapable of questioning why they create only instruments of war, build only monuments to oppression, and love only the system that destroys everything they care about. The perfect imperial citizen is not a mindless drone, but a conscious collaborator who understands exactly what the system demands and chooses to provide it anyway. They see the horror and embrace it. They recognize the oppression and celebrate it. They understand the cost and pay it willingly because they have been convinced that any alternative would be worse. The system's greatest achievement is not controlling behavior, but controlling the imagination, making alternatives literally unthinkable by those who suffer under the current arrangement. This is why your execution was necessary, and why your erasure was inevitable. Not because you threatened imperial security. One guardsman's refusal could never topple an empire, but because you demonstrated that alternatives exist. Your moment of conscience proved that choice remains possible even under conditions designed to eliminate choice. Your defiance suggested that human beings might be capable of something more than the grinding existence that imperial doctrine presents as the pinnacle of human achievement. The Imperium cannot tolerate such demonstrations because they threaten the psychological foundations upon which the entire system rests. If one person can choose conscience over conditioning, then others might make the same choice. If resistance is possible, then compliance becomes a decision rather than inevitability. If individuals can reclaim their humanity, then the whole edifice of systematic dehumanization might collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. So you die, and your death serves its intended purpose. The system continues, the oppression persists, the great machine grinds onward. But your final revelation remains true. The Imperium has destroyed humanity in order to save it, eliminated human rights to preserve human life, sacrificed everything that makes existence meaningful to ensure that existence continues. It is the ultimate victory of survival over purpose, of existence over meaning, of fear over hope. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, humanity has won the ultimate victory. It has survived everything that tried to destroy it, including itself. But in winning that victory, it has lost everything that made victory worthwhile. The species endures, but the soul is gone. The civilization continues, but the culture is dead. The humans remain, but humanity is extinct. And the most terrible truth of all is that this transformation was not imposed by external enemies, but chosen by humanity itself. One small compromise at a time, one necessary sacrifice after another, one step down the long road that leads from freedom to slavery, from dignity to degradation, from humanity to whatever the Imperium has made instead. Your death changes nothing because everything has already changed, long ago. in ways too fundamental and too complete for individual resistance to address. The war between humanity and its enemies was lost before it began, and the victor was neither chaos nor Xenos nor any external threat, but humanity's own willingness to destroy itself in the name of its own preservation. The Imperium calls this victory, and perhaps they are right. After all, the species survives, the Empire endures, the great work continues. What more could anyone ask for than survival itself, regardless of what must be sacrificed to achieve it, regardless of what form that survival might take, regardless of whether the thing that survives bears any meaningful resemblance to the thing it claims to preserve. This is the truth that died with you on that gray morning, the understanding that will be buried with your ashes and erased from official memory. The Imperium has achieved humanity's ultimate goal, eternal life, by eliminating everything that made life worth living in the first place. Private Korvax died twice, once when the bolt round would have torn through his skull, and once when his name was struck from Imperial records. But perhaps he died a third time, years earlier, when he first put on the uniform and swore the oath that transformed him from a human being into an instrument of Imperial will. The question that haunts the darkness of the 41st millennium is not whether humanity will survive. It has already survived longer than any species has a right to expect. The question is whether the thing that calls itself humanity still deserves the name. In the grim darkness of the far future, survival has become the highest virtue, the ultimate goal, the sacred mission that justifies any sacrifice and excuses any atrocity. But what happens when the cost of survival becomes the destruction of everything that made survival worthwhile? What remains when a species has traded its soul for continued existence, its values for security, its humanity for the mere biological fact of remaining alive? The Imperium represents the logical endpoint of a bargain that began with the best of intentions. Faced with existential threats that defied comprehension, humanity made a series of compromises that seemed reasonable at the time. Individual freedom was temporarily suspended for the duration of the crisis. Democratic institutions were set aside until the emergency passed. Human rights became a luxury the species could not afford while fighting for its very existence. Each compromise was presented as temporary necessary, the price of ensuring that there would be a future in which such compromises would no longer be required. But crises have a way of becoming permanent. Emergencies tend to perpetuate themselves, and temporary measures have a disturbing tendency to outlast the threats they were created to address. The system designed to protect humanity from its enemies became an enemy itself, more dangerous than any external threat, because it wore the face of salvation while performing the work of damnation. The protector became the oppressor, the savior became the destroyer, the guardian of human civilization became the architect of human extinction. Consider what has been lost in the name of what has been preserved. The art, literature, music, and philosophy that once defined human culture have been replaced by propaganda, doctrine, hymns of war, and theological justifications for systematic brutality. The scientific curiosity that once drove humanity to explore and understand the universe has been channeled into weapons development and more efficient methods of killing. The capacity for love, compassion, and genuine human connection has been pathologized as weakness, condemned as heresy, and systematically eliminated through conditioning that begins in childhood and continues until death. The Imperium's greatest achievement is not technological or military but psychological. It has convinced its victims that their oppression is liberation, their slavery is freedom, their degradation is honor. The citizens of the 41st millennium do not rebel against their conditions, because they have been taught to see those conditions as natural law rather than human choice. They do not question their suffering because they have been convinced that questioning is itself a form of moral failure. They do not imagine alternatives because their imagination has been so thoroughly constrained that alternatives become literally unthinkable. This psychological victory is more complete than any physical conquest could ever be. External enemies can be fought, resisted, eventually defeated. But when the enemy lives inside your own mind, when resistance has been made synonymous with treason, when the very capacity for independent thought has been classified as heresy, then the battle is over before it begins. The Imperium has achieved the totalitarian dream of perfect control, not just over behavior, but over consciousness itself. The parallels to our own world are neither accidental nor comfortable. Throughout human history, societies have faced the same choice between security and freedom, between survival and dignity, between collective necessity and individual rights. The temptation to trade liberty for safety is as old as civilization itself, and the justifications are always the same. The threat is too great, the stakes too high, the luxury of freedom too dangerous to afford. Each generation believes that its crisis is unique, its compromises temporary, its sacrifices necessary for the greater good. But the 41st millennium shows us where that road leads when followed to its logical conclusion. It presents a vision of humanity that has survived every external threat by becoming a threat to itself, a species that has won every war by losing everything that made victory worthwhile. The Imperium of man is not a cautionary tale about alien invasion or demonic corruption. It is a warning about what happens when fear becomes the organizing principle of civilization, when survival becomes more important than the quality of that survival, when the means of preservation destroy the thing they were meant to preserve. The soldiers who executed Private Korvax believed they were serving humanity. The judges who condemned him thought they were upholding justice. The system that erased him saw itself as protecting civilization from chaos and corruption. Each participant in his destruction was motivated by values that are, in themselves, admirable: loyalty, duty, order, the protection of the innocent. The tragedy is not that evil people chose to do evil things, but that good people were convinced to participate in systematic atrocity through the corruption of their own virtues. This is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the imperial system, its ability to transform human virtues into instruments of oppression. Love becomes possessiveness that justifies control. Courage becomes fanaticism that excuses brutality. Wisdom becomes dogma that prohibits questions. Faith becomes fundamentalism that demands the destruction of anything that threatens absolute certainty. The Imperium does not eliminate human virtues but perverts them, turning the best qualities of human nature into weapons against humanity itself. Yet even in this darkest of futures, sparks of genuine humanity persist. Private Korvax's moment of refusal was proof that consciousness survives even the most sophisticated attempts to eliminate it. Throughout the galaxy, in the hidden spaces where surveillance cannot reach, human beings continue to love and hope and dream of something better than mere survival. These moments of grace are rare, quickly suppressed, often fatal to those who experience them. But they endure, evidence that the human spirit cannot be completely extinguished even by systems designed specifically to extinguish it. The question that remains is whether these sparks of humanity are enough to kindle something larger, or whether they are simply the final flickers of a fire that has already been extinguished. The Imperium has had 10,000 years to perfect its methods of control, to eliminate threats to its authority, to transform human nature itself into a tool of oppression. Against such institutional power, individual acts of conscience seem pathetically inadequate, drops of water against an ocean of systematic brutality. But perhaps that misses the point. Perhaps the value of Private Korvax's defiance was not in its practical effects, but in its symbolic meaning. Perhaps the purpose of choosing humanity over survival is not to change the system, but to preserve something essential within oneself, to maintain a connection to values that transcend immediate circumstances, to refuse participation in one's own dehumanization, regardless of the cost. In our own world, we face our own versions of the same fundamental choice. When we are asked to sacrifice our values for security, our individuality for unity, our compassion for efficiency. How different are we from the citizens of the Imperium? When we accept surveillance in the name of safety, when we tolerate oppression for the sake of order, when we remain silent in the face of injustice because speaking out might be dangerous, are we not walking the same path that led humanity to the grim darkness of the far future? The horror of Warhammer 40K is not that it presents an impossible nightmare, but that it presents a plausible one. The Imperium did not emerge overnight through alien invasion or demonic corruption. It evolved gradually through small compromises, necessary sacrifices, and the steady erosion of principles that once seemed inviolable. Each step seemed reasonable at the time. Each choice appeared to be the lesser of available evils. Each compromise was justified by circumstances that demanded immediate action. The ultimate warning of the 41st millennium is not about the dangers of external enemies, but about the enemy within, the human capacity for self-destruction disguised as self-preservation, the willingness to trade everything meaningful for the mere fact of continued existence, the tendency to become the very thing we fight against in the name of fighting it more effectively. The greatest threat to humanity has always been humanity itself, and the greatest victory of our enemies would be to convince us that we must destroy our own humanity in order to save it. Private Korvax understood this in his final moments. His refusal was not just disobedience. It was the last flicker of human conscience in a universe that had forgotten what conscience meant. His execution was not just punishment. It was the elimination of a reminder that alternatives exist, that choices remain possible, that human beings are capable of something more than the grinding existence that imperial doctrine presents as the height of human achievement. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that humanity fights endless battles. It's that in winning those battles, humanity has already lost everything worth fighting for. The species survives, but the soul is extinct. The civilization endures, but the culture is dead. The humans remain, but humanity is gone. And in our own time, in our own world, we face the same choice that Private Korvax faced in his moment of truth. Will we preserve our humanity even at the cost of our survival, or will we trade everything that makes us human for the promise of continued existence? The answer we choose will determine not just our fate, but the fate of everything we claim to value, everything we pretend to protect, everything we say we are fighting to preserve. The price of defiance is death. But the cost of compliance may be something far worse: the slow death of the soul, the gradual erosion of everything that makes life worth living, the transformation of human beings into perfect instruments of a system that has forgotten why humanity was worth saving in the first place. In our own world, when we're asked to sacrifice our values for security, our individuality for unity, our compassion for efficiency, how different are we from the Imperium? And if we refuse, what price are we willing to pay? The answer to that question may determine whether our future holds hope or only the grim darkness that awaits when humanity forgets how to be human. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that humanity fights endless battles. It's that in winning those battles, humanity has already lost everything worth fighting for.